I agree with you, but some countries have even filed cases on EU. For example, Indonesia, sir, you would recall that in context of EUDR, Indonesia has filed a case saying that EU has conducted regulatory imperialism with its new deforestation law. So I think there is also a pushback, sir.
There is a pushback, and I think there is a WTO dispute on this whole issue at the same time. So let's see where that goes.
Professor Baba, you were speaking about regulatory imperialism. You used the word. So I bring that again, the word regulatory imperialism. But this time in context of number of mechanisms which are in place. And I would like to quote one of the negotiators, Sangeeta Godbole, who was former revenue officer and EU trade deal negotiator. She says that 80% of India's exports attract less than 1% tariff without the trade deal. So there is a counter view that Indian goods will not gain significant market access when the FTA is signed. Is that correct?
I think, two things are there. One, let us look at the outcome document to see where exactly the actual, deal has been given to each side.
Okay.
One of the areas which has been accepted, for example, is automobiles, which Europe was pushing. And what we hear is there's a 40% cut. If I look at the Nifty, already it is sensitive to it. And, automobile share prices have gone down a little bit. So you can see the sensitivity which is there. And then we'll have to see, is it a across the board cut, or what we say is an implementation in a graded way with a number of years built in, protecting the industry and giving it time to adapt and, accept regulatory preferences. But as I've said earlier, also the EU does enforce a lot of stringent regulations which require industry to conform, either in terms of sourcing of what it has got, or raw material, or in terms of labeling, in terms of production. So these are various ways in which the EU can impose additional costs. And so one would have to see that our negotiators on the Indian side have actually been on top of the game. They would also be looking at all of these regulatory measures to see that we are not put at a disadvantage.
If you have a question, a very known Europe think tank has given the headline of this EU India deal called "Living with Friction." Shweta.
That's interesting, because I think that's what we're looking at. We're looking at friction all the way, and geopolitically, and I keep talking about, I think geopolitically, Sudhakarji, we're also in a world which is extremely fragmented. So if there's one signal that we are sending to the world out there by the way of this deal, and apart from all the trade understanding, all the understanding around economy, is that two of the biggest liberal blocs in the world are now coming together, and they're coming together to form a rules-based order of trade. So that's the signaling, and I think the signaling is also important by the way of all that's happening geopolitically, conversations around Greenland, Venezuela, and Trump's often changing diktats on tariffs.
Yeah, Shweta, well said, and thank you. I think you framed your question pretty well. I would say more military-like is black and white demonstration. On one side, you have a black demonstration, which has lasted for so long, and perhaps in my understanding and articulation, I would put it in the perspective of India-EU agreement or FTA is not some kind, it is the kind of a white demonstration of rules-based international order, one. Number two, how diplomacy and dialogue can actually play the better of our relationship and be productive at the end of the day. And third and most important thing is this geopolitical churn, which has been compounded by meaningless and irrational punitive taxation and tariff, which has never been beneficial to the superpower ever in the past of 200 years, has actually turned out to be a sort of a unproductive course of action unleashed by the country against, there are many countries in the world. So having said that, we need to understand, if time permits, if you allow me, I would like to say things. We need to understand that the European Union alone is not 27 countries. It's one of the biggest trading blocs. They have more than 66 countries. The ambassador will bear me out. He's done a fantastic job during his time. More than 66, 67 countries are actually latched on or connected to European Union. Going by the population matrix, you have 45 crores, but if you put Turkey and such like countries, Ukraine and Russia also to an extent, it goes beyond 75 crores. And if you look at the Europe as such, let's not ignore the EFTA. That agreement has been a remarkable golden milestone, and the agreement that with UK, these are going to give a turnaround and force multiply our high-end objective of making or securing the openings for labor-intensive market or labor-intensive products, which had taken a huge setback consequent to imposition of this 50% punitive tariff imposed by USA against India. That is one point. Second point I wish to highlight is that we should be very focused. How is it going to impact our national interests? What is it that is having an overbearing importance in the national economy? To me, if I have to answer this question, I'm looking at a target of 2 trillion US dollar export by 2030. As on today, going by the rough estimate is 857 billion 2025-26. That is the kind of export that we have reached so far. We are aiming at 2 trillion, but I am very ambitious and very optimistic about the way India is going. We'll cross 2 trillion by 2030, maybe by 5 trillions or so by 2035, and almost close to 10 trillion by 2040. That's the kind of market. But what is it which is central to India's self-reliance and Atmanirbhar Bharat? Unfortunately, if you look at the economic pie diagram of services sector, agriculture and manufacturing oblique industry, what stands out is that way back in 2014, we had aimed to achieve a pie of 25% in manufacturing by 2020. We are in 2026. Unfortunately, this manufacturing, which is actually the center of gravity of employment opportunities, addressing the youth bulge in our country significantly, also the ecosystem of I would say the startups that we have got 200,000 startups, third largest in the world. We have got 38,000 GPUs, the graphic processing units, and largest ever in the world are the GCCs. And the GCCs are actually going to attract multinational companies, which is happening. But the central point which needs to be focused and applied is how do you enhance the pie diagram percentage of our economic pie diagram and take it from 15.9%, unfortunately gone down from 16.7, which were there in 2014, to 15.9%. This is one aspect which India has to focus on. Only then the ecosystem of startup and also creating sub-components of major platforms can also pick up momentum in our country. For that, I think a new look has to be given. Maybe our co-panelists, who are very distinguished experts, they will be able to throw some light on this particular aspect. Back to you, please.
Okay. Dr. Bahal, I read these lines to you. If geopolitics exposes the limits of the EU-India convergence, defense and technology reveal where the relationship's capacity for adaptation is most visible. Your comments, sir.
Very nicely put. In a way, if you see the last few years itself, there have been a lot of noises coming or statements being made from the European nations when they are telling India that why are you not, imposing greater restrictions on what you buy from Russia, and why is your relationship with Russia so good, and why are you not pressurizing Russia to come up with an agreement on Ukraine? So when we look at how the mindset has changed, it is not like you rightly said, weaponization of tariffs or neo-colonialist policies followed by Trump or by China, but it is also that there is a great amount of realization today that the wealth of talent that exists in India and the wealth of talent that India exports to the European nations, US and other parts of the world. Like I mentioned to you, 3.5 million, people are working in Europe today, who are from India. They are not Indian origin people. They are Indians who are working there. That is the great difference. So actually, the large number of Indians would be much more. The second part that comes is that it is not just today that this realization has come after Greenland issue came up. If you see February last year, there was a big delegation from European Union. In September 2025, there was EU's Political and Security Committee, which visited India and met the Foreign Secretary, Deputy NSA, as well as Secretary West, essentially looking towards Europe. And then in December, we had Society of Indian Defense Manufacturers who visited Brussels to engage with the EU Commissioner. So what we are looking here is A, realization that yes, India is a balancer towards a multilateral approach where strategic autonomy, along with respect for other nations, is going to play a major role in a rules based order, like it was mentioned earlier, where India becomes part of those nations, like the Canadian Prime Minister had said, that there is a middle powers need to come together. I think India is actually getting above the middle powers with the fourth